Thank you for staying here today afternoon. I would like to talk today about applying Jenkins best practices in a dynamic industry. So I'm Victor Martinez. I work as configuration engineer at ARM in the UK, Cambridge. You can follow me on Twitter. I've been using Jenkins for a few years, running Jenkins area meetups in Barcelona. I'll start soon also in Cambridge. About the title, it's quite long. I would like to split just try to explain the reason of that. So for me, a dynamic industry is this kind of companies that they work in a high demanding market. So customers require new products, either new features. And in any case, these companies, they need to use the latest technologies and just trying to prototype as much as possible to provide these features. So this is the kind of scenario I think best practices can help. So I'll explain further. The Game of Devops is about collaboration, automation, source code. So you configure your best practices in code, and you share with the other people that they use Jenkins. This is the kind of things I really believe in match quite well with the DevOps concept. So let's put an example of the scenario I'm going to talk about. So this is one of the companies I worked in the past. It used to be across the world, so different countries with different offices. People were autonomous, using Jenkins for different reasons: continuous integration, feature branches, automation, continuous delivery, so batch processes. So it came up to 26 Jenkins instances, 600 static agents, 100 dynamic agents created on the different cloud services, and about 1,200 users. So it really worked well at the beginning, but then we realized we didn't have any good best practices in place. So it was writing in a typical wiki page where you define the naming convention, how often you would like to remove the log history, this kind of thing that you could do with Jenkins. But it works, but when you have such a big amount of people using, and they are autonomous, so it doesn't really work as you expect. And even more when suddenly there is an exponential usage of Jenkins. This is real data. It's going to represent the number of jobs and the number of bills per year. And last year was over 2.6 million of bills and 20,000 of number of jobs. Pipelines, job DSL, these kind of practices were in place. So in that moment, we realized like we should provide a kind of best practices, automated. And I'm going to explain now, based on the experience I got from the past and other people's experiences that you can find also on the internet, in different blogs and so on, how it has been implemented. So this one is probably, you probably ask why. And this is the first picture you get about what in Google. So it might make sense for this case, but well, okay, so let's try to understand what is the job description. If you get like 10,000 jobs or projects, you don't want to go in detail about what they do, but you would like to have some job description explaining why it does that, or trying to understand. You cannot just monitor 20,000 or 10,000 jobs. So in order to do that, there is the Groovy Script, like something that you can run within Jenkins. So you are an admin, you go to the management page, you can see the script console. So you can just start adding some script there to analyze some information. I'll go further now. So this is just an example of 5 lines of Groovy Script. So this is just an example of, say, for all the different elements of Jenkins, let me know which of them don't have a description, and just list just the name of those particular projects. So this is something that you can copy and just run in the script console, and you can just get this practice to see how many of them are using it, how many of them not using this. So this is the similar pattern I'm going to explain with all the best practices. The spaces, the name of the jobs should follow some naming convention. In my experience, space in the name of the jobs doesn't really work well with different operating systems. Because of this, you want to reduce the number of environmental issues or any kind of build errors because of the namespace of the name of the different projects. This is another example that you get at the beginning, say, for that particular instance of Jenkins and all the different elements. Just let me know which of them don't have a specific space or which of them got space in the name. Another example is about labels. You would like to also identify all the different projects where they can run. So there is a feature like you can restrict where that particular project can run. And I believe it's important because you can specify labels such as what is the Node.js version that you would like to use, what is the CMake version that you would like to use, you would like to run in Ubuntu 14, 16. And these kind of labels can adapt quite well with the expectation of the jobs. So in this case, it's quite similar as well. You get all the different items that they are configured in Jenkins, and you can detect which of them don't have an assigned label feature. Workspace is also an important point, in my opinion, and based on my experience. I don't know if you're familiar with the typical the typical noise space when you are running your build. That's, in my experience, it happens sometimes a lot, and even more when teams are using Jenkins autonomously, and the infrastructure team provides just a standard machine. So you need to cope all the different jobs to be able to run in that particular agent. The way I define this best practice is there is a plugin that you can use, the workspace cleanup. You can detect all the different items that use that particular plugin. Also, Git itself provides this particular extension, like to remove the workspace before cloning is also another feature. So this is a kind of rough script. It's just trying to show you a little bit, like you can do this kind of best practices and script the logic and to analyze what projects are using it or not. Another one, which I believe is also important, is the log rotator. Happened in the past, one of the teams started using test automation framework, and for every single, no, for, okay.
Is it a documentation that lists all these examples somewhere?
Yeah, we can talk later on, and you will see further details about that. That's fine. Okay, cool. So he was asking about documentation, this sort of thing. So I'll explain a little bit the best practices, and then I'll explain you how it has been implemented as well in a plugin, and you will see those details afterwards. So the log rotator is, okay, coming back to the example, happened to me in the past, like one of the teams were using this test framework. It was making a screenshot every second of the application just running, and they were storing the data within Jenkins. Suddenly, these guys just running these jobs were copying all the space of the master, and therefore were doing a kind of denied of service to the others because the master couldn't cope all the didn't have enough resources to store the data. So by default, it's empty, so it means it will just keep the whole history, but sometimes you need to find out that there are other tools such as Splunk or Graphite or other tools that help you to keep the history. Sorry. And this is one way you can detect for all the different items in Jenkins which of them are using this build discarder and which of them have an unlimited data, which means is -0, -1, it means infinite, so it won't really do any rotation at all. This is the typical example. It was back in 2011 when Koshuk, or something, probably that year, explained in a nice entry why polling should die. Means you can use pushing, which really works well for the concept of continuous integration. I'm going to explain here another pattern. So it's not just to analyze what jobs are using polling rather than pushing. Also, you can put a kind of deprecation policy or disable policy. I'll come up in a bit with this. So this is one of the examples. With a script, you say for all the different items of Jenkins, which of them are using a trigger, and the trigger type is SCM trigger, which means polling. That's the internal API of Jenkins. And then you can see that information. And I'll explain another scenario happened. In the company I worked in the past, we were moving from Subversion Mercurial to Git. People took the bad practice of just changing the SCM URL within Jenkins. It means they didn't change the polling policy. They were using polling rather than pushing. And it came up to 1,800 projects were polling every minute from the different Jenkins instances. And what it really happened is Jenkins really behaved really badly because the Git server was totally crashed with all the different requests every minute. Even the user experience was really bad because it's not just Jenkins continuously doing this, it's also the different users using Git for cloning and pushing and changes. So what we did is just trying to add more value in this script. And we notify the different projects with a warning saying from that particular date, this particular feature is going to be disabled. And therefore, they have a little bit of time to change that. We went even further by disabling the job. So all the different jobs that were using this particular polling policy, from June onwards, in that particular year, we just disabled them. I'd like to highlight here, anything you do with a Groovy script, you should be cautious. Anything I show you until now, it was more just querying, just to know some detail. But in this case, you are changing the internal API by just changing the job. So you are disabling. So you might be a bit cautious. The next one, if you're familiar with any kind of VCS or any version control system tools, Git is one of them. Shallow cloning is a good practice, which means you would like to retrieve only the latest changes rather than the whole history. So you save space in all the agents. You also make things faster. I would like to ask you, how many of you have been waiting longer because the cloning time takes a few minutes, hours, depends. So I've seen that quite common in different scenarios. Either you have a centralized Git server, and everyone is accessing to that particular server. Depends where area or region you are, the latency of the network doesn't behave as, well, the latency is really high. So this is a good practice, just to reduce the amount of data, is just send it over between the Git server and Jenkins. How do you detect this? It's a bit more complex, but the idea of this is for all the different projects that are using Git, if you use the clone option, which is an extension, is an advanced option within the Git plugin of Jenkins, there is an option to say shallow cloning. And this is just a toggle. If you enable that, then it means when it clones, it will clone just and retrieve the latest changes. And this is one way you can detect that. Another example is reference. And what I mean about this is the Git reference repos is another feature within the Git plugin. When you clone, you can clone from the Git server, or you can clone from a local Git repo. So for all the different agents you can have a cache local repo, which is just a project that you have only for cloning. Which means when you clone, you start cloning, well, when the project clones, it tries to first see whether that particular Git local repo exists in that particular agent. If so, it will clone from there, and it will retrieve the delta between the server and the local cache. If it doesn't exist, it will go to the Git server itself. So this is also a good practice. In one of the scenarios, it happened to me, one of the teams had a really, probably 7 years old Git repo with a lot of assets, binaries, and so on. Git is not really good for that, for large file system, but they have a really long history of data. And it was about 10 gigabytes of data. And using this, it reduced for a few minutes for cloning, just for a few seconds. So the user experience is massive, it's good. So I really recommend you scale a lot. This is a really good practice to put in place. And you can detect in the same way as I showed you before with the shallow cloning. So in this case, it's for all the different projects that they use Git as the SCM tool. Check whether they have an extension, and if the content of the extension is a reference method, which is the line number 10, then check if it's an empty one, or check if it contains some data. So this is a really rough, so you probably get the idea. Groovy is quite powerful, and you can do almost anything that you want, but you need to be cautious because you can make things really bad. This is one of the examples I got. There was a team were using Groovy in using the plugin active one or choice one, which means helps you to create some input parameters which are dynamic. And the way you could do that is using Groovy. Because it's Groovy, it means it will run in the same Java virtual machine as the Jenkins master. If there is any error or there is a system exit, it will kill the Jenkins instance. So it really happened to me, and it really took me a bit just to analyze which job was causing this issue. I didn't expect they were using that, but you never know when people use Jenkins, they can do crazy things. So the way you can detect this is just an example using the post-build Groovy plugin, helps you to do further actions at the very end of the build, and it's just trying to do a really simple matching of the system exit. This is just an example. Groovy Sandbox is something like you can use in the pipelines to exactly trying to solve these kind of Groovy issues, like people shouldn't do this because this particular method hasn't been approved or because it's not in the whitelist. So Groovy Sandbox is another example that I really recommend as well. In this case, the script trying to detect all the different items that are pipeline-based and see whether the definition of the pipeline contains the sandbox, enable or disable. Maven job types has been identified for almost 10 years. Like it's really evil. It doesn't perform good, but still is there. So there is a nice chat in the mailing list. You are curious about that. Stephen is one of the guys really empowering people to don't use this. And this is one example that you can do as well to detect how many particular projects are using the Maven type. And now there are another 2 more best practices. There are even more, but I'm going to stop with the next following 2. And it's about different plugins that you could use. By default, Jenkins doesn't stop any jobs, even though they're in an infinite loop, because there is a misbehavior of the configuration of the job. So using the timeout plugin will help you to cope these kind of issues. And it's as simple as you just install. You can detect how many jobs are using this because it's a build wrapper, which means it's something that is configured for the job itself. It doesn't happen either during the build time or in the post-build action. It's purely the job's configuration itself. And this is one way you can detect it. So it's basically for all the different build wrappers, let me know which is the one. It just is an instant of the build timeout wrapper. And this is probably the last one I'm going to talk about best practices. This is one of the plugins I really like a lot. The concept is knowledge sharing is not just source code, it's also build errors. So if you get this build error type, what you do? So who knows that? Normally it's about people that they've been suffering this for a while. Trying to centralize this knowledge sharing is a good practice, in my opinion. Help people to categorize the build errors. Help people to also, if you are a newbie guy in the team, you also will get the benefit as well, because you know, if you see this, then it means I need to work around with this. I don't need to ask people. I can use just some scripts or some central repo where I get those details. So this is one of the plugins, the build failure plugin, which you can plug as a central MongoDB with all the different Jenkins masters, and all of them will push the data to this particular database. This is one way you can detect how many jobs, projects, are using this particular option of scanning in case of any errors. It works as well as failures in the test cases. So if the build is unstable, you can also analyze what kind of test errors happens. And then you get the benefit of this. This is just a dashboard, like visualize all the data. It's based on the Atlas board. It was made back when I was in the previous company. And it tried to highlight on daily basis the number of build errors, the number of stable builds, unstable, and categorize. You can also get environmental issues, how many of them are related to the infrastructure, how many of them are related to the build itself of the test, for the different instances of Jenkins, which is the average of builds and the failures. So it's a way you can centralize information and visualize that and help people to understand more about the Jenkins ecosystem. All right, so these best practices can be also disabled as well. So in the job description, you just add this particular disable git shallow cloning, it means for that particular my freestyle job project, it won't apply this particular policy. It helps as well because it's a kind of bidirectional communication. So the owner of this project doesn't like this best practice or consider it doesn't really fit with the project itself. So it's just forced, sort of, to put this job description, and then this particular script won't get it, so won't show as a proper defect or bad practice. This is what I did back 2 years ago with this company, and then I consider it could be great to try to evangelize this. Well, this is what I did to evangelize, because anything you do in code can be easily reproducible. It's easy to collaborate because everyone together can define these best practices. It's easy to visualize. There are other plugins that you can use to know who is the owner of this particular project or who has changed that, and then it's easy to poke these people to let them know that this is the bad practice. You can also use this kind of deprecation policy or disable policy or even modify. Modify policy for me is the case of the log rotator. This is an example. By default, it's disabled. So the history of the builds will keep there forever. So you might think could be something to force. Let's say I don't want to keep the history more than 30 days and the artifacts no more than 5 days. So this is something I consider as the modify policy because you can change that and adapt. But again, you need to be cautious if you use the Groovy script because you can break things. This is what I did. I just said that a few minutes ago. I consider this is something a community could use, and I made a plugin back in 2015 trying to use these best practices in a more black box and then more secure because it's not Groovy, it's Java, and then you cannot break things. And it's considering this kind of tools such as Sonar, PMD, check style, all these tools analyze the code. And now the practice of Jenkins is using pipelines, using job DSL, using the Jenkins job builder as well, another way of model your pipeline jobs and freestyle mapping job types, all these kind of things. So you can do as well as code. And just taking that in consideration, this is what I did. So basically, the plugin support almost all the different type of jobs or projects. It's trying to visualize as well for each single defect or practice I told you in the previously, and which is the columns. And you can see also in the rows which are the name of the jobs. And in green, it means it doesn't apply that particular practice because it's OK. And in red, it means you need to consider to review it. You can also see how it looks for that particular defect best practice and how many jobs, projects are using it. It's also something that you can see within the job itself. There is a direct link that you can click and see for all the different defects, what it means, and also the status. You get as well like the lint stability, which is just a percentage. It's quite similar to the weather icon you get when the build fails and how often and so on. So it's a percentage. It's also supporting some kind of practices for the agents as well. And all the details about what it means, each best practice, is already documented as well within the plugin. So there is an option to see that details. And also what is the control comment that you can use in your job description. This is something I can explain here. So in the job, which is the project My Freestyle, there are 2 different entries, which means that particular log rotator doesn't apply, and that particular job assigned it label checker doesn't apply. Probably the names are not good, but you probably get the idea. And the outcome is in the project view of the different defects table, you will see like a yellow, it means it has been disabled because someone didn't think it's something that they would like to use. Oh, sorry, someone thought it's something that they didn't want to use. All these global settings means you can enable disable by globally to all the different projects. You can disable one of these practices because it doesn't apply in your use case, in your scenario. It's also about whether you would like to lint or analyze all the different jobs, even though if they are disabled. And how I see the future, probably trying to put some effort of providing a command line tool, then you can lint, analyze your pipelines, also the job DSL, to fully support the pipeline, even though with the shared libraries as well, to use a kind of automation to either fix the trivial ones, because it might give you the value, you don't need to change that, but it might overlap with the concept of using pipelines or job DSL or the Jenkins job builder, and probably integrating as well with Sonar, because I believe Sonar really works well to centralize all the all the defects from your source code, and if we use pipeline, job DSL, and so on, it's just source code anyway, so it will work as well quite well. You want to try? This is where you can find the plugin itself. I've been developing for a while and trying to add more features in the last few months, so hope you just enjoy. We can go further about now with the question. Do you have any?
Curious. So it doesn't fully support pipelines, right?
Yeah. Pipelines doesn't implement the abstract project, which means some of the post-build action, publishers, and so on, is not within the pipeline, it's within the script itself, right? And that hasn't been supported yet. It's something I'm working at the moment. It does only for the job log rotator, maybe the name of the pipeline, the description, but not all of them, because it's something like I need to find out how to do it, or someone can find out how to do it. Any other questions? Yes, please.
How do you police the dashboard with all the Jenkins metrics, the failed jobs, successful jobs?
Oh, that's already implemented as well. Okay. And it's one of the dashboards you get either from the central, I mean, I can show how it looks like if you think it's useful. I'll do a demo. I didn't expect it to do it, but I'll try. Okay, I have here a Jenkins instance. It's using the latest version. I have only 3 jobs. I don't know if you see fine. Okay, so this particular icon that you see on the left hand, that's basically the overall view. If you click over there, let me just zoom less a little bit. You get the whole picture of how it looks like for all the different jobs. You can also search as well for the job that you are looking for. If you put the mouse on any of these columns, you will see as well what it means, every defect or every column. You can see as well per slave or per project. You can get also the overall view of how it looks like. So it means this particular best practice or defect, depends how you would like to call. There are 3 of them that are using it. You can also get about the severity and also the percentage of defect versus the one that has passed. What else? And then in any of these jobs, you click on any of them, you get on the right hand, you see the stability as well, which means 68% of all the defects are passed, and so it means 32 are not. You click on the left hand as well, and you see further details as well. You can, I think it's almost done. As well for the different agents, so you can also see how it looks like as well. From the global settings, what I mean, if we go to the management of the Jenkins and to the global config setup, and I look for the Jenkins Lint. You can enable or disable. You will like to whether to analyze all the different jobs, all of them, or not the disabled ones, whether to show the lint stability box in the job itself, and for all the different projects, best practices, whether to enable or disable them, and either to configure some of them with something. If you click in any of them and say, I don't want to apply this practice, when you go to the Jenkins Lint, it means has been disabled. So you can adapt quite based on your use case. But yeah, any other questions? Okay. Say again?
The thing that you show about aggregating errors.
Yeah.
So you can see on the dashboard.
Yeah.
You repeat the question so everybody can hear it recorded.
Yeah, I'll say, yeah, so it's about the, he was asking about the aggregation of the graph.
No, you showed earlier about the build failure, like you can collect all the build failures in the
all right.
database.
That's not within this particular plugin. I was just saying about best practices, and the build failure plugin is something I consider useful when you work in a decentralized environment, distributed in different locations, because teams might know about the particular build error, and it's a way you can share between people. It's a practice I also use as something recommended within the plugin, so there is a specific practice or defect I consider is useful to use, but this particular dashboard or that particular dashboard hasn't been implemented here, it's something else. Any other questions? Okay, so I hope you enjoy this, and also you have the certification exam. Good luck as well, and yeah, thank you for attending today. Thank you.